Howdy, folks. Welcome to Follow the Leader. We are here with Cody Robinson from Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Cody is a pastor at a United Methodist church. He has served there, for 5 years?
I've been at this one for 3 years.
Three. And I met Cody in Phillips Theological Seminary in Tulsa, Oklahoma. As I said, Cody is down in Tahlequah. He has his master's in divinity. Cody is an enrolled member or a part of the United Kiowa tribe. It is under the umbrella. I don't even know if umbrella is the right way to say it either. It's not under the umbrella of Cherokee because it's not. Cherokee is trying to break them under their umbrella. For anyone who has been watching the news recently, there has been some changes, specifically with how the Cherokee Nation is looking at citizenship and who belongs or does not belong in their community. Cody, I know that you are so much more accomplished than I just gave you credit for. So if you could share with the audience more about yourself.
Sure. Hello, friends. I am Cody Robinson. It's my great pleasure to be here and have this space with you all today. I am a licensed local pastor in the United Methodist tradition. I've been doing vocational, professional ministry for about 8 years now, and I've currently served my appointment in my hometown with my tribal people, I should say, for about 3 years. So I would describe myself as a scholar. I've been described as like an academic, and I think those are two different things, and we could talk about that later. But I don't know, scholar sounds a little bit more pretentious than academic, but I consider myself a scholar and a theologian. But as Lee had said earlier, she and I met in seminary, best friends, but I'm excited to hold space and walk with you all and talk to my buddy about just whatever. So I'll shut up.
So tell me, you have been in Tahlequah your most of your life, born and raised? Okay. And you went to Northeastern State, NESU, which is in Tahlequah. It's a very beautiful campus. Um, By the way, Tahlequah had a lot more vegetation than I was expecting. I've gone to Tulsa and Norman and Oklahoma City plenty, but have not been out that way. And visiting you last year, it's really, really sweet town. Lots of trees. It has that river nearby. Beautiful, beautiful area. Tell me about Tahlequah and its history.
Okay, so Tahlequah is nestled there at the foot of the Ozark Mountains. Very beautiful area, part of green country, as we call it on this side of the state. Because once you go west past the rivers there, Tulsa, Norman, Stillwater, etc., etc. There's not a whole lot of trees and it's a lot of plains, but here on our side of the state, there's mountains, there's hills, there's forest, there's the opposite of mountains, valleys, and rivers and creeks and lakes and all of that. But Tahlequah is the original, I guess the landing place for some of our Cherokee folks. Got there and found out that they had some cousins, some relatives already staying there for whenever they had come over, excuse me, they had come over to Arkansas at one of the military forts, Fort Sill or Fort, one of them. I'm not good at geography, I'm afraid. But these two groups of people had met, Cherokee people had met there in Tahlequah. And the name Tahlequah itself means two is enough or enough for two in the Cherokee language. And so it's the capital city of the Cherokee Indians of Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and the United Kituwa Band of Cherokee Indians of Oklahoma. A giant mouthful of a title for a people. But yeah, that's Tahlequah. It's home to Northeastern State University, of which I went and got my bachelor's and master's degrees from there. So yeah, what a beautiful place. And I love that you had a chance to come down, Lee, and take a look at that.
Yes, and we toured the Cherokee History Museum and as well as the Cherokee Prison. And then did we stop at the art museum?
Yeah, we walked by it.
Sorry. And then we had the pleasure of going and attending a service at your church in which we sang Amazing Grace in Cherokee. That was beautiful. So you have been at your Tahlequah Church, your United Methodist Church, for 3 years. I saw, as I just mentioned, there we sang Amazing Grace in Cherokee. When I was there, I saw multiple flags representing different tribes, nations. How many different people, how many different groups are part of your congregation?
I would say that there's about 8 or 9 tribal nations represented within our congregation. Now, I'm told that we need to get even more flags to put up on the wall because there is a larger representation as a whole, and I couldn't even begin to tell you which nations are represented there. Not only because I don't remember, but also even if I did, I probably couldn't pronounce them. So I don't want to embarrass myself like that.
So tell me about this calling into Methodist ministry. You grew up Methodist. Was that with you didn't? Tell me about your spiritual journey.
Well, I originally grew up within the Christian faith when I was 6 years old. Both of my parents were not churched at all. My mother had been raised with some traditional spiritual understanding. Her grandfather was a Christian minister of the church within our, I guess you would call it an allotment. So the land, federal land given to my family as a whole to live on. On the edge of that border, toward the next town, there was a chapel there that my family and extended family had gone to church and received Christianity there, so they say. And my grandfather preached there, and my whole family went there. But my mom was not like super keen into it for a variety of reasons, most of which that kind of sentiment is shared with indigenous folks, because like the missionaries and the colonists and the forced conversion, all that. So she really didn't want anything to do with it. Perfectly valid. Love that for her. My father, he was a member of the Church of Christ denomination, which is overall an American-made, kind of legalistic denomination focused on individual congregations, etc., etc. Um, but my family's church was an Indian Baptist church, and so it's independent. It's geared toward an understanding of Scripture, with very little else to kind of go in there and inform spiritual practice. I was there from when I was 6 years old, got baptized, and then when I was 12, 11 or 12, it just kind of didn't jive with me. There was something about, well, half of it I couldn't understand because it was in Cherokee, and I had been taught and conditioned to read and speak English when I went to school. And then there was this whole thing about like hell and damnation and fear and stuff that I kind of wasn't into. Kind of didn't speak to me in a way that I thought it probably should. If this is a spiritual tradition and I'm not vibing with it, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe I need to get out of here. And so I did. I joined a Southern Baptist tradition church as a teenager and did a little bit of youth ministry, in so much that I was the most well-behaved kid, and I could read better than everyone else, they say. Had a good speaking voice, they said. I got to be youth leader, but it wasn't until I went to college that I learned about the Methodist Church. Leaving home and going into the city and trying to make it on a college salary, which is nothing, no financial aid and all that. It was hard for me to find a stable place to live and to like have shelter and be safe. And so a lot of the time I spent couch hopping or sleeping, staying in places I probably shouldn't be. But there was this small house on the edge of campus, where I heard that people were giving out sandwiches and chips and stuff that I could like put in my bag if I needed it. And it happened to be a Methodist campus ministry. And so I'd spent maybe 4 weeks, twice a week, just going there, picking up something to eat and heading out. Didn't even talk to anyone. But I think it was because people weren't like, what's the word? Proselytizing, evangelizing maybe, that it was just a means for someone like me to get something to live on. I started asking the questions like, "Hey, what are you guys? What's up here?" I was very suspicious. Like, what are y'all doing? What's the angle, right? But the person that I talked to just so happened to be um, They call them district superintendents in the Methodist Church. So she's like a supervising pastor. But she was a woman. That was crazy. I had never thought or about, women being preachers, women being ministers. That was a whole new thing. That was wild for me. And I remember asking her, I said, "So y'all have lady preachers?" And she laughed. And she wasn't mad. I mean, she wasn't angry. I would have been offended if someone asked me that these days. But no, she said, "We sure do." I thought, "Oh my God, okay, all right." Um,
See?
right, right, for real. Like, just seeing, witnessing, experiencing someone different, right? Someone different having the role of a pastor or a spiritual guide or someone like a minister opened my eyes to and opened my mind to think that there's more than what I understand about the faith. And then maybe the things that I've been taught aren't the only way to believe and understand it. And so the example of a woman pastor opened up an understanding of, hey, we can understand God, creation, the world, one another, um, in other ways rather than what we know, what we've seen, what we've experienced, and really rely on community to make that happen. And so I never left the Methodist Church after that. I was
Yeah.
I was hooked. And so I've been serving in a vocational ministry, professional ministry for 8 years, and then I'm at my church, the one I'm responsible for here in town, for 3. And so that is my little testimony about Methodism. But I also understand that it's not for everyone. Just like the faith traditions I grew up with are not for everyone. So,
I do want to go back to your point about the way faith or the spirit presents itself differently. Having a female pastor pass out a resource that you needed without any sort of proselytizing or asking anything of you in a time when you really needed it. Thank you for sharing your vulnerability with your couch hopping and how stressful and difficult that must have made college to be able to have to be creating stability like that or looking for it every night. So I have a lot of admiration and respect for you for completing your degree. A lot of people would just say, I'm out. Um, but absolutely, especially when you have been in, like, as you said, the Southern Baptist tradition for a little bit as their star youth kid, or um, in the Churches of Christ, which, as we mentioned, is very congregational. In my experience, I've seen them to be very patriarchal. So, what a swing for you at a time when you really, really needed it. Um, and that's really beautiful to watch the spirit work in that way. So you were introduced to them, you said, in your undergraduate. What did you get your undergraduate in?
I hold a bachelor's of science in criminal justice with a minor in political science and a minor in Cherokee cultural studies. So sociology is what
Yeah,
my undergrad's in.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, what awesome pathways to best understanding ministry too, criminal justice. I wish we had more classes like that at seminary. Just a few. Okay. So at NESU, you got your criminal justice with minors in political science and Cherokee studies. When did you start getting pushed towards your leadership organization masters?
Um, as far as doing the work or understanding leadership, that began in high school. So I was in student leadership then, and I also was in ROTC in high school. So my original goal, one of them, was to maybe join the military after high school in the chaplaincy corps. But at the end of sophomore year of high school, I broke my ankle and like pulverized that little bone there on the side of your ankle, just smashed it to dust. What a wonderful thing. And one of the most ironic things, and I think it's a God thing now because we were at the Performing Arts Center at school, and the seniors had just did their recital or their rendition or their play of Footloose. like the movie Footloose where they're all dancing because doesn't want them to dance or whatever. Anyway, so we were leaving that, and that's when I tripped in a thing on the hill and just like destroyed my ankle watching Footloose, and so that's ironic, I think. But that also meant that I couldn't enlist, which sucked. But I stayed in student leadership, and I really love trying to see what other people can do when we work together. And that lasted into college, where had a few groups I was a part of. But while I was in undergrad, I really liked the concept of public policy. My capstone, one of our activities for my capstone class in criminal justice was if you were to write a policy about an aspect of criminal justice, what would it be? And then mine was about Native American juveniles and recidivism. So looking into the reasons why Native Americans commit crime, what are the risk factors, what are the circumstances about that, but especially for children.
Tell me about a major paper, academic paper, or study that you focused on that you found to be very enlightening in all of your sociology studies.
So if I remember a most profound paper, so my capstone for my bachelor's degree had to do with recidivism rates, which is the likelihood that someone would recommit a crime and reoffend. And I wanted to kind of sharpen that down or reduce that down to Native Americans. And then I also thought about, well, if I could reduce that down even further, what about juveniles? And so growing up, I noticed that a lot of the kids that would get in trouble at school were ones that looked like me. Um, I noticed that in the newspaper, there were more Native Americans who were getting thrown in jail for this, that, or the other. And I really wanted to know why that was. Is it just because there are more of us in the town? There are more of us in the county? There wasn't. But doing that research, I found that a loss of identity and a desire to have a community, a desire to have a peer group that approves of what you're doing is one of the high causes of crime amongst children, or at least deviant behavior, getting in trouble. It's because they really want to seek approval of their peers, but when your peers are of a different culture or different socioeconomic status or sometimes a different language, a way of life, what are the ways that you can find connection? And unfortunately, acting foolish is one of the easiest ways for people to come together. And so gang affiliations, the acts that have to do with solidifying that type of behavior with another, going out and robbing a bank or going out and what do they call it? Sticking someone up, mugging someone, I guess. I don't know the term. Um, but going out and trying to steal from other people and stuff, being challenged to do that to fit in with your social group. Um, and those are crimes that you can easily be identified by. So it makes sense that you get caught and you suffer the consequences of that. But to see that there wasn't a lot of literature, there wasn't a lot of academic writing over Native Americans is what really blew my mind, which kind of started me on this journey of trying to publish or find or figure out why folks like me are not represented in the academy or even what academics or scholars write about.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. And thank you for fleshing out that topic and providing more research. I hope that I will be honest. Some of my followers ask for documentation, so I might request a PDF or some way to. In fact, I'll at the end I'll push people to your social media if you'd like any of your blogs or give you a time to pitch. But specifically Native American writing, and you and I talked about this last year when I did a paper on the Indian boarding schools, was how challenging it was to find Native American, either Native American written or just material on it or extensive research. I remember I wrote, something like 25 pages, and there was a children's book written by a Native American about the Indian boarding schools with child appropriate language. And I had sourced it, and my professor was like, "That's not an academic book. You can't do it." And I was like, "But it's like actually pretty solid compared to a lot of the material that's out there." That wasn't my main source, of course, but it was just speaks to the challenges of finding Native American writing. But absolutely, when you talk about community as being the thing that all of us are looking for, and it doesn't matter if that community is doing what is legal or not, or as you said, it's a form of belonging. These activities, these these sort of, especially when it's heathen behavior, protest, essentially these micro protests at the man. How do Native American juveniles, do they go to the same juvenile detention of other state juveniles, or do they have their own systems? What does it look like with tribal punishment, tribal discipline?
So it wasn't up until recently that there were separate programs for Native American juveniles. Back when I was doing my work, they were just having the Cherokee Nation had a treatment center for juveniles there, pre-reservation, pre-legally recognized reservation, pre-McGirt versus Oklahoma, where it was an option for children. You either go to juvie, you go to jail, or you could go to this Native American rehabilitation clinic where they have won many awards for their treatment programs because it's not state sanctioned. It's not the same type of programming they do. It's very much a holistic, let's fix or let's adjust or let's analyze, let's refine the wholeness of the person. And so doing the limited scholarship of an undergrad student back then was one thing, but I experienced what that looks like when I served as a summer intern over at the facility here in Tahlequah and met with a bunch of juvenile offenders who were also seeking treatment for chemical dependencies. I'll phrase it like that. But they were always given 3 square healthy meals a day. They had time to have a spiritual component to it where they would have someone come in and kind of hold space for them to have like group therapy, but it wasn't group therapy. They didn't call it group therapy. It was just to share being positive and having affirmations for the day. They had time to express themselves with like art, and they had cultural activities like making medicine drums and dream catchers and just a lot of things to have them think about being a part of a community. And even though we had children there of different tribes, there are still some concepts where they could find belonging there with each other so that they might be able to go back where they've come from and help change the environment there. It was really profound and a very, um, I don't know the word, to see our children, our youth, be in such dire straits of there was a 12-year-old, for instance, he had gotten addicted to what is it, black tar heroin. And when we did an intake, he suffered withdrawals for like 8 days, and it was horrifying, just absolutely horrifying to bear witness to that. But finally, when he got that out of his system and he started to really like eat the food and talk with the fellow workers there and talk with the other kids, it was almost like light and day or night and day that this was just any other child. It could have been like one of my little cousins, or could have been someone just running around town. I mean, just a simple, normal, average-looking kid. But to see him in that state was just heartbreaking.
Yes, thank you. I recently read a book that I've shared with you by the author Tommy Orange, and it follows 5 different characters, and he's kind of built a world over 2 books. I know for sure. I don't know if the third book is part of this world of characters, but that is one of the character storylines is that he struggles with pills and goes to rehab. Oh, excuse me, audience. Tommy Orange is a Native American author who writes Native American stories. They weave history and contemporary culture and concepts like generational trauma or epigenetics into his stories. So this particular one of the storylines was one of the characters gets addicted to pills and goes to rehab, and then it is at rehab that he meets another fellow Native American person, and that's just the right time. Like it just clicks with him. He's just open to hearing it because that's a large chunk. He doesn't want anything to do with indigenous culture and like the whole time and keeps sinking further and further into pills and because that is also the other side of it um, is wanting to belong to the native community or into these gangs or in just any group, but then also having a sense of wanting to distance from that same community. Could you speak to that at all, or if you've seen that in uh, your own world or
Despite having all of the signifiers within my own tribe of being like truly a member of that community or a member of our people, I was not raised with my cousins. I was not raised with my neighbors. I was not raised in community. It was like my mom, and that was it. Like the only connection I had to my people, other than going to school and having a handful of people who lived down the street, and they would be my cousin, really no connection there. And it wasn't really for me until, and I write about this in some of my writing, it wasn't until I was in college that I was comfortable um, identifying, I guess is the word, as Native American, because I think there's a phenomenon called white passing, I believe is what it's called. And I could have and have done that for a while. Signifiers of being native now. I grow my hair out. I usually am shaved, clean shaven, but I'm not today. It's just you, right? No. But having a desire just to fit in so that your life is easier, I think is something that a lot of folks can, I hope, resonate with and identify with, but also can understand why it would be easier for people just to fall in line and not make a fuss. So in my experience, and you can probably, cut whatever you want to out of it, but in my experience, the desire to be a part of a community also means the risk and sacrifice of doing what you need to do and can do to fit in.
yeah, and there's so much at risk, particularly as you mentioned earlier, the socioeconomic differences, the dominant class, like the colonialism, like there's so much history. And if someone like in your case was like, well, I don't have this very strong sense of community or belonging growing up with my indigenous community, I'm white passing, I'll just go where it's easier seems like it works in that like you can get by, but then you have all these questions, these deeper questions that can't be answered by trying to fit in with into I don't know how you would say it, but into white supremacy. But like it's uh and even like you said, there's other forms of healing. Like even in the Cherokee, it was a juvenile rehab specifically or a rehab with the juvenile department. So, how special for you to get to college, have the experience with the Methodist female pastor, get food without any obligation or pressure. So now you've stumbled into the Methodist world, and then you started to stumble also at the same time into you had your Cherokee studies minor. So now you're going deeper into Indigenous. So it's really fascinating that you both very core, deep things, part of your identity, branch out in college and you start following both. Um, can you share a little bit about the Methodist history with Indigenous?
From what I understand, which is not a whole lot, that it was not taught to me specifically in seminary or from the church. So, as part of earning a Master of Divinity As far as the Methodist Church is concerned, you are required to take 3 hours or one class of history, one class of church law, and one class of like theology. But within my history class, and this is no discredit to the institution I went to or my professors, it's just not something that's incredibly important back then. Didn't know anything about it. I figured that Methodism is a faith tradition from Europe that came into prominence here during the Revolutionary War and then kind of grew up with America, or the United States, I should say. But that also means that there's got to be, they had to do something with them Indians, as we would say. And so the United Methodist Church last year, or the year before, published a report, a true academic footnote, endnote report detailing the places where they were responsible for boarding schools, they were responsible for like cemeteries, the treatment of native folks here. And so there is a whole document that they're doing and they're adding on to. And I was very impressed and very excited that somebody somewhere is starting to own up to those things and want to do the work of reconciliation. So that was a really big surprise to me. So personally, I don't know a whole lot, but I can find that information and give that to you and your audience for sure.
I want to talk a little bit about your role with the Methodist denomination on the Anti-Racism Council. Is that the correct name? I know that it's anti-racism, but what is the official name?
I serve as a member of the United Methodist Church's Anti-Racism Task Force. Um, yeah, so this has been a small kind of experimental group from the United Methodist Church that got together starting last year, and I was brought on board in the springtime, I believe it was, through one of my colleagues in the Indian Methodist Church. I just got my degree, and now I know everything, as they say. And I was given the opportunity as a younger person to be a part of conversations where there weren't representation. Because in the past, they primarily had African American folks and then white folks, white people. And they wanted to really open it up because, racism is more than just black and white. There are a lot of ways systems of power or institutions can discriminate and be prejudicial against people who do not benefit initially from that type of stuff. And so I was asked to serve on that board, and I have an article that I wrote about a presentation that I did for the task force concerning Native American spirituality. We did some work on like cultural competency, which is a big fancy phrase for learning when to step back and allow space for other cultures to kind of exist in the same space as one another. And I have a great vision and a great hope that an institution as large as the Methodist Church is making strides to kind of critique itself and providing space there for us to figure out what anti-racism looks like. And that's more than tolerance. It's more than just accepting that people can be in the same room as you and not go crazy about it and not have an overly harsh opinion of difference. That's my hope for the force, that other institutions might be able to have those honest conversations about what support for marginalized groups will look like.
Because, by the way, audience, you won a few awards while at Phillips. You were also on Student Senate. The awards won were scholarship and academic. Saw his name a couple times at the end of the year. So, not surprised that you would be chosen for your brains, your voice, your experience. But I I heard when earlier when you were saying expanding the color palette of anti-racism and decolonization beyond black and white. Um, that was something that Dr. Dellinger, one of our professors at seminary, talked about in her recent class. I'm going to say this very delicately because I don't want people to get competitive, is not the word, but basically she was sharing how in the colonial days, there was value on the black body, the enslaved black body, to produce labor. And then, of course, female slaves sometimes were used as sex slaves. So there's this labor component of where the black body has value, even if their humanity did not under colonial racism. However, a lot on the indigenous side of it, there was just genocide. There was no value. We want all of it gone. We don't want to see any, like, either completely assimilate or die, essentially. Um, and so I that is something, just the way she worded that was talking about value of the body under white supremacy. And like I said, I'm glad that you're on the task force and not the council, um, to continue to be a voice, and bring memory and recognition to that. Um, I had the opportunity of being on a call with y'all a few weeks ago. We had a really nice speaker from Oklahoma City University speak on Christian nationalism. And I was very inspired just to see. I love seeing a whole lot of Southern. I live up in Montana. I'm from the South audience, but I love seeing so much Southern pushback to Christian nationalism, whether it was the Oklahoma City speaker speak on it or even political actors like James Tellerico. Can you Something that I have really tried to explain to people is that Christian nationalism is not new. It's been here forever. It just kind of gets rebranded, gets different jargon, but it's all this very white heteropatriarchy conservative Christianity that is the map for so many people. Um, and I just don't use that map. Like that's, I mean, I don't know how else to, that's just not at all how I approach life. Um, One of the things that we haven't talked about, we've talked about Indigenous, we've talked a little bit about seminary and your anti-racism task force. I want to speak briefly on queerness and indigeneity, particularly because I just spoke with someone, a Salish artist up here in Montana, and she was talking about queerness just as in her artwork, her indigenous artwork is totally different than the Western binary, particularly in this conservative heteropatriarchy. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about Native American queerness, particularly opposed to the Western binary of black and white. Like you said, black and white, the gender. So, but yeah, Cody, if you could share with us a little bit about literally different ways that Indigenous people approach something like queerness versus Western heteropatriarchy approach.
So one of the things that I would like to share is that indigeneity, or a Native American and an indigenous approach to anything social, is that by its nature exists outside of the norm, the standard. And in our country, it's Eurocentric, comma, white, comma, conservative, comma, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of the small political identifications that people hate to talk about these days. Indigeneity, or the act of becoming or being or embodying being indigenous, by its nature exists outside of that. And so whatever we consider in the binary of male and female, there are a lot of attributes or a lot of performances that are put into one of the two categories. So for instance, one of the more common, readily available examples is that blue, the color blue, is for boys. The color pink is for girls. Now I've been on the internet for a while, and people are quick to say, well, that was in the 1940s when they changed it, and blue used to be a girl's color, and pink used to be a boy's color. And that's a great thing to know. But the fact that you have discriminated color and put those into one or two categories is by itself pretty crazy thing to do. But as far as indigeneity is concerned, we not all of us, but most of us, I can't speak for every nation, but there's an understanding that these things are interrelated. And so a color is sometimes just a color. A piece of fabric is sometimes just a piece of fabric. Whether or not it's got two holes in them or one hole in it for you to wear it, it serves a function. I think Native American art, for instance, is so profound because we are the culture, the dominant culture, as you had called it, Lee, is so apt and quick to assign anything, everything, into its own little category or its own little box, which means the quality or the value of the thing is measured by how much it fits into the little box it's in. And so to have folks who are doing art with mixed mediums or mixed palettes or colors that don't go together, for instance, or using materials or methods of creating that aren't the standard is a way of queering the artistic space. And so living outside of existing outside of thinking about things that aren't just left or right, black or white, I think is how the world works, the natural world, I think. Outside of us living in our brains and like living in our bodies. I think that's the way that queering things works. That we are able to change. People are able to truly change who they are and what they are because we grow, hopefully. The world changes every year. From spring to summer to fall to winter. I've been alive for a little bit, and now it's kind of like winter to summer to fall. Why we don't have a spring here anymore. That season is unheard of. Right now, I think you were saying that it was snowing in Montana on October, in October. It used to be cold where I live in October. It is 85 degrees out. Um, that's so strange. So even the world changes in ways that we can't expect, and so do we. To have an idea or understanding that things remain static and things must remain in its place forever and ever, and that can't change. I think that that's doing a little bit too much, and it itself denies the reality of the world we live in.
Well, super tie it back to sin and damnation and the things that you had problems with in your childhood theology. Um, and then you were saying that's just not how the world works. There's this total, like this Western approach of like, we need to banish it. We need to like create this like cookie cutter world and demonize for one, or at the very least be intolerant of anything that doesn't fit this cookie cutter. And then kind of like just what you were saying, and then indigeneity was like, okay, well, that's not this is how the world works because they're here. We're not going to demonize them because they don't met rules that we put on the earth. I really appreciate that perspective and their sense of humility too, like acceptance, rolling with whatever the I don't know, abnormality is not the word, um but just being far more accepting and tolerant of a queerness, but also um of the fluidity of life. And I really appreciate that. I think a lot about how Western patriarchy obviously hurts everyone below it, but how Western men, they just seem to be struggling in so many ways. What's next for you?
Well, I believe that, for everything there is a season. At least that's what they say. And I want this next season of my life to be in a place where I can be of service. A lot of the things that I like to do in my public ministry or public theology or public writing or whatever is to say, how can I help? How can I be of service? How can I take all this stuff that I've learned and share it with people, because that's what I want to do. That's the main reason why I went to school and stayed in school and can be in school and be a little professional learner, is so that I can have a chance to share what I know so that we all can learn. I originally went to university because I didn't think I could ever get out of the reservation. So, what's the best way of learning about the world if you can't be a part of it? But now I've had opportunities to go and speak, to travel a little bit, even though it's terrifying. I hate to leave my family behind for days at a time. But if you know anybody or have anybody who'd be willing to, have a conversation, to share what we know, I'd love to be a part of that. So that's my next season of just seeing what opportunities show up.
Cody, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you. I hope that you'll come back in the future. We'll have some topics already carved out and do some deep dives fleshed out. But everyone, I am so excited to introduce you to Cody. Like I said, hopefully he'll be a recurring guest on Follow the Leader podcast. Cody, could you share with us how we can find you or read more about you or follow you?
Oh, yes. If you would be willing to check out the things that I have available, my website is Manic Scribe, MANICSCRIBE.net. I would love for you to take a look at some of the posts that I'm doing. I go over political philosophy, psychology, post-colonial studies, some nerd stuff, some video game stuff in there, just opportunities for me to share who I am, what I'm about, and again, learning more about the world around me. So I encourage you to check out my website there and follow me on social media at My Lord Robinson on Twitter, X, Threads, etc., etc. So thank you.
Thank you again for your time. And folks, we'll see you next time on Follow the Leader. See ya.